Welcome to episode 89 of Lucretius Today. I'm your host Cassius, and together with my panelists from the EpicureanFriends.com forum, we'll walk you through the 6 books of Lucretius's poem, and we'll discuss how Epicurean philosophy can apply to you today. We encourage you to study Epicurus for yourself, and we suggest the best place to start is the book Epicurus and His Philosophy by Canadian professor Norman DeWitt. For anyone who is not familiar with our podcast, please visit EpicureanFriends.com, where you'll find a friendly community with our goals and our ground rules clearly stated. If you have any questions about those, please be sure to contact us at the forum for more information. In this episode 89, we'll read approximately Latin lines 830 through 917 from Book 6 as we discuss geological phenomena such as hot and cold springs that seem counterintuitive. Now let's join Martin reading today's text.
Or else sometimes the force and rising blast of these Averni dispel the air that lies between the birds and the earth, and the intermediate space becomes a void. Here, when birds are carried by their flight, they immediately flutter in the air, they clap their wings in vain, their pinions flag, and when they can no longer bear them up, nature must drive them down upon the earth with all their weight. And as they helpless in the vacuum lie, they breathe their soul abroad through every pore. The water in some wells we find is cold in summer, because the earth is rarefied by the sun's heat, and by that means the seeds of fire it contains within break freely out into the air, and therefore the more the earth is affected by the heat, the colder the water will be that is enclosed within. But when the earth is contracted with the cold, when its surface grows close and its pores are stopped, this restraint hinders the heat from flying out. It is then squeezed together into the wells, and the water becomes hot. There is a fountain near the temple of Jupiter Ammon that is cold in the day and hot by night. Men strangely wonder at the quality of this spring, and imagine that when the night has spread her dreadful darkness over the world, the water is warmed by the violent heat of the sun through the body of earth. But this reason is far from being true. For if the sun striking upon the open body of water is not able to warm even the surface of it, when it receives the force of his descending rays with all their heat, how can he warm the water and infuse his heat through so thick a body as the earth, especially since he is scarce able with his scorching beams to pierce through the walls of our houses? What then is the reason? Doubtless this, because the earth near this fountain is more rare and spongy than it is in other places, and contains within it many seeds of fire near the body of the water itself. Here, when the night has spread the world with dewy shades, the earth below grows initially cold and is contracted. By this means it is compressed, as with your hand, and squeezes out those seeds of fire into the spring, which makes the water warm to feel and taste. But when the sun has driven away the night with his bright rays, and with his heat has rarefied the earth and made it loose, these seeds of fire return into their former place, and all the heat that warms the spring retires within the earth again, and so the fountain in the day is cold. Besides, the water in the day is strongly moved by the sun's ray, and by his trembling streams of heat grows rare, and so lets out the seeds of fire it held by night, just as by the heat it shakes off seeds of cold, and melts the ice, and loosens all its bonds. There's likewise a cold spring, over which if you place tow or flax, it immediately takes fire and is all in a blaze. A torch newly extinguished, in the same manner gently drawn over the surface, is lighted by this water, and flames out at every breath of air. And no wonder, for there are many seeds of fire in the water itself, and many must needs rise out of the earth, and ascend through all the fountain, and flow abroad, and make their way into the air, but yet they are not so hot as to set the spring on fire. Besides, the innate force of these seeds dispersed through the water compels them to move upwards, and to unite upon the surface, as we see sometimes a fountain of sweet water bubble up in the middle of the sea, and beat off the salt waves that are about it. The sea affords many of these springs that bring a seasonable relief to the thirsty mariners by throwing out streams of fresh water among the salt. The seeds of fire may in the same manner break through the water of this fountain and flow out into the town. Here, when they unite and stick to the body of the torch, they immediately fall into a flame, for flax and tow contain many seeds of fire within, which makes them easily disposed to burn. Have you not observed, when you hold a candle newly extinguished to another that is lighted, it catches fire before it touches the flame? A torch likewise, by that same rule, will do the same. And many other things will take fire at a distance before the flame reaches them. And this, you may imagine, is the case of the fountain above mentioned. And now I shall begin to show by what power of nature it is that the stone, by which the Greeks call a magnet, from the countries that produce it, for it is found in the region of the magnetes, has a virtue to attract iron. Men are amazed at the qualities of this stone, for it will make a chain of several little rings of iron without a link between to hang together entirely from itself. You may sometimes see 5 or more hanging straight down and play in the gentle air, as they stick close and depend at the bottom one upon another. The ring that follows feels the attraction and power of the stone from that above it. So strongly is the virtue of the magnet communicated to the several rings. It acts with so great a force. In inquiries of this nature, many things are to be first proved before we can fix upon the true cause. We must trace the subjects through many long and intricate difficulties, and therefore I beg you will hear me with a willing mind and with the closest attention.
Okay, thank you for reading that today, Martin. This one's a little bit shorter than we've been dealing with lately, but there are several changes of topic going on. And next week, or when we get to it, there's a longer section on magnets. What we've included here at the end today will be just a teaser for some 200 lines devoted to magnets. As it says at the end, it's a much more difficult subject to discuss that. But for today, we are continuing from last week, concluding the discussion of the Avernal pits, or the Avernal areas that kill birds. So we're not entirely departing from the dead bodies and the falling birds from last week. We can continue along that happy topic for a few more minutes anyway before we get to the rest of today. Anyway, again, thank you, Martin, for reading that. And 8:30 is where we start today with the final words on those falling birds. Any comment on those, Don? I know that's a favorite topic of yours from last week.
Yeah, I will have to look some more information up about these falling birds and pits and trees, the shade of trees that will kill you and all those sorts of things. That is an unexpected diversion there, it seems.
I think the funniest thing about today's sections is he gets almost everything wrong.
Well, before we go into the details of everything wrong and all the rest of it, I do have a comment, I guess, at the end of this line 8:30 about the falling birds. I guess what he's adding in this passage is that they helpless in a vacuum lie, and then they breathe their soul abroad through every pore. So perhaps this part of his discussion of the falling birds might be that one of the causes could be that maybe this pit has caused a vacuum or somehow removed the air, which allowed them to fall. But then there's also the comment that they breathe their soul abroad through every pore. So we're never very far from the observation that the soul is united with the body and at death is sent out into the world and dispersed, just like with us.
Distributed throughout the body, and so if it's distributed throughout the body, it's going to leave the body through every pore as well.
Yeah, I think that's at least sort of a transition from last week. And then we turn to this issue of how it's very apparently interesting to him that there's a fountain that can put out both cold and hot water at different times.
I did find it interesting in the Loeb edition, at least. It talks about after line 839 that some editors think that there is a page missing from the archetype, from the original manuscript, and that's the reason there's such an abrupt break in topic there.
Oh, that's a good point, because it sure is an abrupt break. It doesn't have any transition whatsoever in what we're looking at.
Yeah, so there's looks like some editors think that there's at least a page missing from the original manuscript, and that's why there's a thing. But of course, then in the Epicurean fashion, but some editors don't think there's one. There's a break there. So it could be this or it could be that.
Well, I guess we'd have to go back to the very beginning of Book 6 to look at the sort of topics that he was intending to cover. But we're generally just going through a series of geological or just natural phenomena that strike people as unusual and showing what the natural solution for it is. Do you guys agree that that's probably the general theme we're doing here?
Yeah, I would agree. But definitely, since he talks about that some people think that these Avernian locations are the entrance to the underworld and things like that. Exactly.
Martin, you're with us on that?
Yes. So basically, in principle, yes. but like I said, he gets the details in his explanations.
The only thing in his favor is that they're all natural explanations. So
Yes. Sometimes it surprises me when I think that you're going to say something's totally wrong. You say it well, it has some merit to it to some degree. So it's hard for me sometimes to predict. How do we jump into it? Do you want to talk in general about how you see something wrong about all of these, Martin, or we just go through each one?
Let's go through the first one first, because they're quite different. Each is quite different.
Okay.
So that means apparently what is Averni are apparently volcanic in origin. So possibly that area is hotter, and that means air which comes in from the side will rise. So the true thing is then the pressure of the air will go down. So the tendency towards a vacuum is not absolutely wrong, but actually birds like when this happens, because the draft of the air going up that makes them rise easily without that they have to flap their wings. So they just sail then and move up. So I see this a lot. So along the high-rise building here, the air tends to move strongly and often up, and then the pigeons really like to fly up. Or recently, when I sent them away, they lost a fairly big feather, and the feather by itself was moving up.
Yeah, it is something to watch birds soar on those updrafts and things. We have a number of hawks and larger birds that are around this area, so it's interesting to see them not even flapping their wings and just soaring in the sky.
Martin, now that you've brought that up, though, and I look at it closer, let me ask you this. Isn't it not interesting that he is seeing that the force in rising blast dispels the air? Well, I was looking for it to be stated specifically, and now I don't see it. But isn't he saying that because the intervening air becomes a void, that draws them in that direction? And that's actually the principle of how an airplane flies, right? That the wing places the air that goes on top, forces it to travel more quickly, which faster traveling air has less pressure in it. And that's how a wing rises, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a simplified explanation. But the thing is, it's not like this. So in this case, because the draft will not be as strong to produce a real vacuum. So in a real vacuum, yes, the birds would fall down. Or if you're in a very strong, if the pressure drop is extreme, yes, the birds would fall down. But they don't do that. And also, they wouldn't really die from it if there was something like a stream of air pushing them down. So yes, they might try to steer against it, but it wouldn't kill them. So there has to be some poisonous gas there which does kill them. And that's why they come down and die.
Indulge me just a little bit further on this issue of wings of airplanes, because it seems like I've read that there's some controversy about whether, in fact, a wing gets its lift because the air traveling across the top has to go faster than the air on the bottom. I've heard there's some controversy about that, but I guess what I am looking at here is he's saying that the force of the pit dispels the air that lies between the birds and the earth, and the intermediate space becomes a void. So if indeed you have an area of air that is being forced in a particular direction to travel faster, that does create sort of a suction in that direction, right?
Or in the opposite direction, in the perpendicular direction. I mean, that's Bernoulli's law. So if you have a streaming fluid, the faster the stream is, the more you have some sort of a suction effect opposite to it. So that part exists, but there's a counterexample of that this is the main reason for planes to fly, because planes can fly with upside down. Recently, I saw
yes.
Geese do that.
So you've heard, you know what I'm talking about. I forgot the Bernoulli name. I've read about that, but I guess when I was young, when I used to read Popular Science magazine or something, I would read about these issues. And yes, airplanes fly upside down, even though supposedly if the air traveling over the curved side of the wing forces it in that direction, presumably that would force the airplane down.
Yes, so that means this shows already this is not the complete explanation. The complete explanation is more complex. I read an article on this one which claims to have the proper explanation, but I forgot it now. So because this simple story with the Bernoulli law, it really sticks in the brain, and I really would need to dig up that paper to again figure out what's the complete explanation for the flight of planes is.
But the Bernoulli effect has not been disproved, or it's not been rejected, right? It's still considered to be valid, at least to some degree.
It's still part of it. The Bernoulli law is still part of the explanation, but it's not as easy as it looks first. So like just as simply stated as in the old textbook, that on this side it streams faster and that causes it to fly is not correct.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so moving on.
I loved Martin's line there of the complete explanation is more complex. I think that's a good motto for something. I'm not sure what, but that's the complete explanation is more complex is a nice little retort to people who want nice cut and dried answers sometimes.
Right. That's probably a good example of something to use as an illustration of that, because I do remember when I was very young in school, you would be taught about how an airplane flies, and there'd be pictures of these wings, and the air would travel faster over the top, which would be the explanation for the curve of the wing. And then later I heard, well, that's not true at all. So like you said, it's complex and more than one thing going on at the same time. Okay, let's change this. Go ahead.
I mentioned he writes that in those textbooks, the drawn lines of how the air flies are completely invented. They have nothing how it goes in actual fact.
Well, I'm still not so sure that we shouldn't peg this one, though. If we were looking for interesting scientific statements that presage the future, just like when he talks about how the feather and the rock would fall at the same speed in a vacuum, although I don't know he said it exactly that way. Maybe this is a statement that a thrusting area of air creates a suction of some kind. I don't know whether that's a good observation or not, but let's move on to wells and how some are cold and some are hot. I think this is one of the ones you probably have a problem with, Martin, too. The earth is porous and...
The phenomenon might be there, at least the way we feel it. This effect can be there. But in the later paragraph, he dismisses the explanation which is actually close to what's true. So, and his own explanation is wrong. So that is then quite the interesting thing that others at the time had the right explanation already, and he in this case Epicurus got it wrong.
Well, okay, so you said a couple things there. Does he come to a conclusion here as to which one he thinks is right, or is he simply still listing possibilities? You're saying that maybe one of the first possibilities he lists turned out to be the right one and he shouldn't have gone any further. But so you're saying one of the ones that he comes to you really don't like, which is the one you think is really off?
No. The thing is, he quotes an explanation which is not from Epicurus. It's what some people, I need to
okay.
And he dismisses that one, which other people say. But in this case, those other people are right. They have the right explanation, and Epicurus' explanation is wrong.
Well, go ahead and lead us through that. Can you go ahead and talk us through which paragraphs you're talking about? Which one is the one? What is the explanation that other people suggest?
No, let me find this.
Yeah, we can work our way through it. It looks like in 848 he's talking about some people say that the water is warmed by the heat of the sun through the body of the earth, as if it's heated from the other side of the earth, I think. So he says that's far from being true.
Okay. Yeah. So men wonder if imagine that when the night has spread, at least it's partial. So the thing is, there are still multiple ways to explain it. No? So one thing could be that it's just subjective. No? So what happened is when the sun rises, the top surface of the earth gets heated up quickly because, as he correctly says, the beams do not penetrate into it. They just stay at the surface, and that means the heat is deposited in a much thinner layer. Whereas in the water, the light penetrates very deeply. So that means there's almost no deposition of heat per volume in the water. So it's very small compared to that, because that light can go, depending on how turbid that water is, it can go many meters into that water until it eventually gets mostly absorbed by the ground. And in this way, the surrounding earth and the air above it get hot, and water is cool. So this is why at daytime, that in summer, the water is comparably cold, and then in the night, the opposite happens. So the surface of the earth cools down very quickly after it's no more heated by the rays of the sun. And corresponding to there, the water the air is cool, and now the water with its very big heat capacity gives off its heat only very slowly. So subjectively, you feel that the water is warm, no? Compared to what you feel with above the cooled down earth.
Well, now, Mark, it sounds to me like you're sort of talking about large bodies of water, even including the ocean. As I'm trying to decode this myself, it sounds like he's really kind of focusing on some wells, and then he talks about a fountain. So is he really talking about the large bodies of water, or just a particular type of fountain that seems counterintuitive?
Yeah, okay, but then it can still explain this from the Earth, because another effect will be so that from the surface of the Earth, the heat will slowly travel deeper down, and to that portion which is in contact with the well, and then it will give off the heat to the water when later on the night falls. So at the top surface, it cools down quickly, but deeper down, because of the slow travel of heat through the rock, deeper down there is still the rock is still hotter, heated up, and then can give its heat to the water in the well. So I think this is the explanation which he dismisses, and that one is correct.
I did find it interesting that the fountain or the spring that he talks about with the shrine of Jupiter Ammon is mentioned both in Herodotus and in Pliny. So evidently this thing got some major airtime as far as everybody knowing about it and being fascinated by it over a long period of time.
And the general issue there then, Don, is just that it puts out cold water in the day and hot water at night.
Yeah, exactly. I pulled up the Herodotus section in his histories, and it says, if you'll indulge me for a second here, he's talking about springs and salts and things like that in the desert. He says, the first on the journey from Thebes, 10 days distant from there, are the Ammonians, who follow the worship of Zeus of Thebes. For as I have said before, the image of Zeus at Thebes has the head of a ram. And then he goes, they have another spring of water besides, which is warm at dawn and colder at market time and very cold at night, or very cold at noon, excuse me. And it is then that they water their gardens. As the day declines, the coldness abates until at sunset the water grows warm. It becomes ever hotter and hotter until midnight, and then it boils and bubbles after midnight. It becomes ever cooler until dawn. The spring is called the spring of the sun. So that is Herodotus. So not only is he saying that it's hot at night, but it boils at midnight and then gets colder during the day. So it sounds almost like it's like a hot spring or something with some sort of interval, like Old Faithful and
it's an interval
Yellowstone.
situation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So it's more something like that then. Yes. So I didn't have that background. So it has been interaction with geothermal effects then.
And I had not seen that. Certainly didn't come across in Lucretius, but that's certainly what it sounds like. And whenever Herodotus is describing it, he's going to much more detail there, it seems.
But the funny thing is, where does this daily period of the geothermal activity come from?
Well, that's what he's saying in 861. It looks like it looks like he's saying that the heat of the sun is making the earth around the fountain more porous, and that somehow changes the heat of the area. I think that's second.
The heat from the sun is sinking into the earth. Is that what you're saying?
Well, he says doubtless this, because the earth near this fountain is more rare and spongy than it is in other places, and contains within it the seeds of fire near the body of water itself. So then here, when the night has spread the world with dewy shades, the earth below grows initially cold and is contracted. And by that means it is compressed and squeezes out the seeds of fire into the spring. So he's talking about temperature changes of the dirt around the fountain, making it easier or harder for the heat from the surrounding area to touch the fountain, apparently. That 861 seems to be the key as I look at it. And because then he says when the sun drives away the night and made it loose, then the seeds of fire return to their former place, and the heat that warmed the spring retires within the earth. So he's talking as if the temperature changes during the day and night are compressing and decompressing the area around the fountain, allowing some kind of subterranean
the seeds of fire to seep into the water, and then it.
Yeah.
I think no, I don't. This doesn't have credibility. So the thing is, the effect, the geothermal thermal effect is dominating. So the only funny thing is, where does the daily rhythm of that dominating geothermal effect comes from? So this one, as of now, I don't want to speculate. But anything what the sun does there is too small in effect to act as a move like that. So the reason for this daily this fluctuation over the day of the geothermal activity, that has to come from something else. So it's something really subtle. Someone has to investigate. But because this one is really there in the sources and a lot. So I'm sure that some geophysicists have examined this and have an explanation. I'm just not aware of it. So this one we may want to dig up to really get clear on this one.
Yeah, we use the word credibility there, and that called to my mind that when I'm reading all this stuff, there's really two levels of analysis. The first is, even before I get to the question of whether I think he's right or wrong, there's always the question of what is he saying? And this one to me is, this one, especially in 861 there and 874, it's kind of complicated to me to even understand what his position is, much less evaluate whether I think it's right or wrong.
Yeah, it almost seems like he's saying that the sun is the source of all the heat for those changes in water temperature and that sort of thing. But
I would say he's not saying that. I would say that he's saying that the sun is the source of the heat that changes he calls it like a sponge somewhere here. And it looks to me like he's saying that the sun's heat is like it's turning a valve on and off, or increasing or decreasing the porosity of the area around the fountain. And that whatever is underneath the fountain, I guess.
Let me talk through this and see if I'm understanding you then. So you're saying that there are seeds of fire in the earth. The sun makes and the earth is porous like a sponge, and the sun is what is making the earth contract and expand.
Yes.
And when it contracts, the seeds of fire are pushed into the water to make it heat up. And then whenever the sun the opposite, then whenever it does that, then the seeds of fire aren't squeezed out of the earth.
Yeah, I think squeezing is a good word here. And in fact, squeezing does appear in this translation in 861. It looks to me like, and then compressing. It's like he's got some kind of analogy going here where he's squeezing or compressing a sponge and then letting it open, and then it becomes more porous when you open
it reminds me of his metaphor for the fleece for the clouds, that the clouds soak up the water and then are squeezed by going over different mountains or whatever, and then that squeezes out the rain. So this instead of the clouds as fleece, he's using the earth as a sponge that squeezes and contracts and expands.
And there's the other word that, as you're saying that, it reminds me of, it's almost as if they're really fascinated by this expanding and contracting analogy, because there's that word about condensing pleasure, which I don't know that I even now have a good explanation for what he means when he says condensing pleasure, but it's almost as if there's a lot of analogy going on through several places where there's almost like a bellows effect or a sponge effect where you're pressing it together and then allowing it to expand. And for some reason that must have been of interest to them, that mechanism.
I don't think the sun can actuate this mechanism. Plus, it is not really clear with what we should identify the seeds of fire. So it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
Yeah, it's frustrating to me that he was talking about volcanoes for the longest time, and the heat from the volcanoes and the sulfurous smells and that sort of thing, and that he can't make the transition to the geothermal idea of heating up the water from maybe the lava or whatever it is that would be in the earth that would possibly heat the water up. But it doesn't seem like he can quite make that transition.
Yeah. It certainly seems like it'd be related, and he'd be talking about them at the same time, and maybe he is in his mind, but
maybe that was in that missing page that was supposedly missing from the manuscript. So I thought it was nice that Herodotus at least gives some extra details on that spring or that fountain. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, this was very important to mention because it shows that my take was wrong. So because this heat.
Well, that was not my intention, but.
No, but it's important to know that because it's stupid if I am here stuck with the wrong explanation.
Yeah, and I will say that's one of the interesting things I find whenever Loeb or some of the other translations will give those, this is also mentioned in Herodotus, or this is also mentioned in Pliny or Aristotle. It's always interesting to get those other takes on the source material that they were all working from, all the different authors were working from. And the fact that this fountain, like I said, is mentioned in Lucretius and Herodotus and Pliny. Evidently, everybody knew about this in the ancient world. So
yes. Let's go ahead, and I think similar issues occur throughout the rest of what we're reading for today here too. Let's talk about, so what's the next example starting on 879? There's a coal spring, and I meant to look up the word tow, but I guess we're talking about some kind of a fabric or some kind of a substance that.
Yeah. It's like tow-headed. I mean, it's like.
What does toe-headed mean? I've never known what toe-headed mean. I
believe it's blonde. Somebody who's blonde.
How does that relate to flax? Are we talking
flax
about
flax is also a
yellow
fabric. Yeah, yellow. Yes, thank you.
Are we talking about the wick of a candle here?
No. This is a bit funny. So when I look for the German translation, tau, or like you pronounce it, toe, is the same as flax, according to what I saw. No?
Okay.
So I don't know why it's called ore. So I saw it identified as the same.
According to our unimpeachable Wikipedia source, in the textile industry, a tow is a coarse broken fiber removed during processing flax, hemp, or jute.
Okay, and I see that both Monroe and Bailey do not use an or there, Martin. They just use the word tow. Maybe it must be that Mr. Browne's translator here thought that it would help us to have tow or flax. Maybe
that's basically, you could put that in parentheses so you could use either word. It looks like
maybe that is parenthetical expression. Yeah.
And to answer your question, it says the very light color of flax tow is the source of the word towhead, meaning a person with naturally light blonde hair.
I had no idea. I thought it had something to do with being pointy-headed. So I've learned something. I've learned something today. I thought it was derogatory. In fact, I thought it was derogatory. So tow-headed is not a derogatory term, you're saying?
No, someone with naturally light blonde hair.
Ah, wow.
I think that's why I've heard it mostly in relation to children, young kids who have that really light blonde hair.
All right. So don't listen to me on tow then. So what are we talking about here in 879 and 890? You're placing a piece of flax over a coal spring and all of a sudden it blazes into flame. So we're talking about some kind of gasoline or some other kind of liquid here that's semi-explosive or incendiary. Is that what you think is going on?
Oh.
Yeah, but that would make sense. You will still have something what starts a fire. And I just see that where it could come from.
So what kind of a coal?
Yeah, so he goes on with the torch newly extinguished in the same manner, gently drawn over the surfaces, lighted by the water. So there you have an ignition source by that. And I mean, it could very well be either natural gas or some sort of oil or something, an oil slick that comes out of the ground over the surface of water, over a spring or something like that. I mean, I could definitely see something like that happening with that.
Yeah, natural gas
or some sort of, oil slick or something.
Or methane.
Yeah, that would work with a torch. No? So if you have a freshly extinguished torch, which is still hot, so that one can incinerate the gas which comes out there. So that one is understandable. But not that you just place tower flags there. This will not take fire without you have a source of ignition.
Right, exactly. I would agree with that. That seems to be a little expanding the analogy a little bit too much there.
Yes. So unless you have something if you just have the flammable gas, it will not do that. So you need an oxidizer there which reacts immediately with of flags. So I'm trying to think about what could naturally come out and be strongly oxidizing that it could do that. So currently I couldn't think of anything natural which could do that.
Well, maybe he's mainly just fascinated by the idea of there being a liquid that can burst into flame. But you're right, the source of the ignition is a problem in what we're reading here. But is it possible that that's really what he's concerned about, is that there's something that looks like a liquid and yet it can... Do they have liquid sources of fire? Alcohol? Does alcohol burn? Surely they had
at
alcohol.
A lower temperature, but...
Yeah, but you need to have high concentration. The alcohol from wine will not burn because it's too low concentration.
Right.
So you need to have, not sure whether they had distillation already. So if they were able to distill to produce hard spirits, they can catch fire.
Yeah, and I remember pictures of Native Americans in western Pennsylvania up around Titusville and those sorts of areas where the first oil rigs were drilled, of paintings of Native Americans scooping up the raw oil off of like the surface of the water and streams and stuff that would leak out, and they would use that for various purposes and stuff. So that's the kind of image I have in my head of this with the torch and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that means that makes more sense than something like alcohol or something like this. No? So that you have a place where the oil comes naturally to the surface.
And it would make sense since he's talking about Egypt and that sort of area too. That there's a lot of oil and that sort of thing in that area. So
sometimes the Sumerians, for example, they already had access to tar. They had tar on their roads, and so they must have had something similar to the surface accessible to them.
Right.
Okay, now, so he switches and discusses the sea at Aradus. He appears to be talking, for a moment at least, about fresh water flows within saltwater areas. Now, I guess that's not particularly controversial, but then he goes back and talks about the tow further again. So I guess he's using the Aradus freshwater flow example to show that you can have some other foreign substance welling up from below, I guess.
But that is also what I question. I mean, of course, depending on the geological conditions, you can have a spring of sweet water at the bottom of a not too deep sea. No? If it's too deep, you won't have that. But if that area of the sea is shallow and the freshwater reservoir is above that, it will that level where that ground of the sea is, it will push the water, the sweet water into the salt water. But I don't think it will be undiluted enough that people on ships can just scoop up that water. By that time it reaches the surface, it would have been mixed with the salt water again. So
that would have to be a very shallow body of water and a really forceful spring coming up.
Yes, so almost like really getting out of breaking through the surface of the sea there. So
right.
It's like a fountain. Huh? Okay, then
right.
You scoop that one up. But I'm not aware of anything like this happening. So what I'm aware of, you can have springs at the bottom, but not something what will make it to the top.
Well, I'm afraid that we are going to have sort of some discontinuity here, because I think we're going to find over the next several passages, including the ones we do next week or the week after, that we're going to find some answers to what we're talking about. Or at the very least, we're going to see that I was trying to think in my mind whether he was, the issue we have about the flax catching fire without a source of ignition is that he's presumably talking about there being some interaction between the liquid and the piece of tow without them touching each other, because that's what he's going to go into next week on magnets. I remember I've read that so many times that he's now in 900. He says, "See you not too that when you bring a newly extinguished wick near night lamps, it catches fire before it has touched the flame," and the same as with pine wood. "And many things beside catch fire at some distance, touched merely by the heat before the fire in actual contact infects them." So I think he's laying the groundwork not only for just talking about how fresh water can come up through salt water, but he's also talking about action at a distance to some degree, how things can jump from one to the other without you seeing visibly what's going on.
Oh, this is interesting. Real quick, I tried to find something about that spring at Aradus, and I'm seeing a thing from Science Direct here saying, for example, the Roman geographer Strabo, who lived from 63 BC to 21 AD, mentioned a submarine fresh groundwater spring 4 kilometers from Latakia, Syria, near the Mediterranean island of Aradus. Water from this spring was collected from a boat using a lead funnel and leather tube and transported to the city as a source of fresh water.
Wow.
So that's pretty exact.
Yeah, that's more sophisticated than an aqueduct by far, if they're actually getting the water out of the ocean.
That might be worth digging into a little bit and posting on the forum after we find out.
I've never heard it. Have you ever heard of that, Martin?
No, I didn't hear of that one. But like that, it makes sense, because if you bring a tube down to where the spring is, you can get isolated enough from the salt water and get it then out there. So that might work.
That's quite ingenious of that. I'd have to dig around. I'll try and find the section of Strabo and post that, and maybe some other scientific things from that. Yeah.
Well, let's cover the last two as an introduction to next week, because 906 and 917 are the introduction to magnetism. And I think Don's already made the comment that 917 is a reference to that in things of this kind, many points must be established before you can assign the true law of the thing in question. It must be approached by a very circuitous route, wherefore all the more I call for an attentive ear and mind. So he's clearly talking about the complexity of certain issues, and this is going to be one of them.
As much as I like talking about those dead bodies, you've been talking about magnets now for quite some time. So
that's exactly right.
This is all you, man.
Well, I don't have much expertise in it, obviously, either, any more than I have on toe-headed children, apparently. And I don't know where magnesia is, or that area that it comes from. I don't know anything about the geography there. And all he's really starting to say here is that you can produce 5 or more suspended in succession and tossing about in the air, each one in turn from the other, experiencing the binding power of the stone. And with such a continued current, its force flies through all. So how is he connecting this in his mind to the fountain at Aradus and the cold and hot fountain at Ammon?
Like you mentioned, action at a distance. So the similarity is action at a distance.
Good point. Yeah.
And this 906, it just remains empirical. So it just quotes the observation. So I don't see anything wrong in there. So it sticks close to the observation, and then you don't come in with thought. So it's so that one is okay. But just to close paragraph 900, to take out the wonder about catching fire at a distance. So that means that, things which can burn, they will have a temperature at which with the presence of oxygen, they will catch fire. And that is the explanation. So in order to incinerate something, you don't need it to be touched by a flame, as long as the temperature goes high enough, which if you're not too far away from the flame is the case.
Yeah. I will say I find it somewhat heartwarming and very human to imagine somebody from 79 BC or whenever Lucretius was writing, talking about the rings hanging from a magnet and sort of swinging them in the air. It's something that can fascinate people and children now, and it was just as fascinating hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So I just find that a very human sort of anecdote there.
Mm. Yeah, I mean it's the only unusual action at a distance thing what we have in daily life, so to say. The magnet, something what we may encounter in daily life. With all other things, it's more complicated. To do this charge separation, it just requires more effort to do something. But the magnets are just there. You pick them up and you play with them.
Yep.
So this is the only thing which, I mean, of course, gravity is there too, but we are so accustomed to it that we take it for granted. It's nothing special to us. But this magnet thing is something what normally doesn't happen, but then it happens, and it's unusually strong. It's stronger at that moment if we use the right parameters and sizes. It can counter gravity.
Yes, countering the gravity part is very fascinating. All right, we are probably at the end of a normal session for today. So let's think about wrapping up and closing thoughts. And we turn to Martin.
Yeah. So this comment on 900 was already by closing one and the one on the magnet. So I have nothing to add.
Okay, very good. Don.
I think I'm good. This was a fun little segment here.
Yes, it was. And I'm sad to say that next week you might not be with us. We'll have to see what we choose to do, if we have a substitute for you, or how we'll cover magnets. But as someone who
you will soldier on without me.
Well, I don't know about that. We'll have to see what we want to talk about. If we find somebody else who wants to talk about something else, maybe we'll take a detour. So we don't want to deprive you of the ability of talking for 200 lines about magnets. As
I think we should make you read that section. You've been waiting for this for a while.
I don't know about that. That's right. This would be your turn to read next week too, so we'll have to figure that out.
Clever of me, no?
We'll figure it out. And we have the 20th coming up tomorrow night for our people who participate with us on the forum. That would be another opportunity to invite everyone who listens to the podcast who might not take the time to come to the EpicureanFriends.com forum to drop by and discuss this and all of our episodes with us and participate with us in studying Epicurean philosophy. We try to talk among each other, not only on the podcast, but other opportunities when we get it. So everyone's welcome to drop by, and we hope they will. So let's close it at that. We will talk again in another week or so. And thank you again for your time today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right. Bye.